Thank you for your welcome. And we'll do what we can with technology. And you've probably seen half my slides already, but that'll make us quick, won't it? We've heard a lot this morning about systems of care, and we've heard a lot from lived experience, which is exactly as it should be. And I'm just going to continue those themes by talking to you about the Peer Work Guide, which is being launched today, which is very exciting, and about the practicalities of developing that lived experience workforce. Not necessarily a nice, smooth, straightforward journey. Peer work has been around for a long time. It's not new, we didn't invent the concept. It's very well embedded in national and state policies, frameworks, protocols. The voice of lived experience is expected to be there. It's also been there in the NEDC from the beginning, although you may not be aware of that. It was one of the very earliest briefs for the NEDC to work out how to involve lived experience more effectively as we built towards a nationally consistent approach to eating disorders. And that started out very small scale, just saying, how do we get people involved in the NEDC? And it kind of grew up from there towards the stories from Experience Resource, and now the Peer Work Guide, as we've gone on snowballing and snowballing. Where does this take us? The NEDC commissioned the development of this guide so that service providers and others would have access to the evidence on what you need to do to build a peer workforce. There was a small problem with that goal. And I'd like to take you on a very brief journey through some of those problems, but also through the contents of the guide and what you might find there, and whether it might suit your purposes or not as you consider building the system of care. Okay, the first challenge was identifying the evidence. We did a scan of the peer-reviewed literature. We came up with 9 articles. We changed our search criteria in our databases. We had 3 different researchers working on this at different times, and you know what? It didn't make a difference. There isn't much out there that's specific to eating disorders. So we broadened our horizons, and we investigated the practices of peer programs actually in Australia. And our criteria were that they had to have published something about their work, so that there was something out there in that more peer-reviewed space that could be looked at. But they also had to be either current or fairly recent, so there were people we could talk to. That was an important part of what we did. We did a survey, we also did personal interviews, and we had a wonderful expert advisory group who I'll mention again later on, who came, Belinda was one of them, to share from that experience of what's worked, what hasn't worked, where do we go from here? And that's the origins of the Peer Work Guide. The good news from all of that is that what we did bring together as evidence is very consistent with the much bigger literature from the general mental health peer work. So we have a base there to start from, to say there is some evidence and we can use this as a platform to launch. It's a good place to start, but it's not a strong evidence base. So the guide that's being launched today, think about it as a work in progress. As new programs are developed, as new research and new evidence comes on board, as we hear more from lived experience of people who haven't had peer workers, people who have had peer workers, we start to contrast this. So the NEDC is committed to continuing to develop and add to this resource to make it a living document that will continue to be part of building the system of care. Why do we need a guide? Why not just employ someone with a history of eating disorders? In fact, given the prevalence of eating disorders, you're probably already doing that anyway. Isn't that enough? We start from the premise that peer work is in fact a unique area of work, that it is quite different from other roles that you're going to find in the health system. And just like any other new practice, it needs to be used in the right way and supported in the right way to achieve the intended outcomes. Just having lived experience may not be enough. We defined peer work as roles in which the worker draws on their own experience of recovery to help others achieve improved recovery outcomes. Whatever we define recovery as, we're not going into that, but to actually improve what that might look like. We looked at roles where there was a contract and an expectation of training and supervision. They could be paid or voluntary. We didn't make that distinction, but we did make the distinction that it was actually a role, because this piece of work fits into the much broader work that is happening in terms of developing the mental health workforce, and also sits alongside the work that ANZ and the NEDC are doing around credentialing and building up a quality workforce. So it fits in that space. We looked at employment, not necessarily informal peer support. In the guide, peer work refers to consumer peers and carer peers. Both are covered, discussed both together where there are similarities and separately where there are distinctions in those two roles. It also refers to roles where there is direct peer-to-peer contact, so peer support, peer mentoring, peer coaching, those kinds of roles. But it refers to roles where it is more lived experience to other professionals, where the lived experience is in the advisory role to take that other perspective. So education, research, consultation, those sorts of spaces. It applies to both. The common denominator between those roles is that they're non-clinical, they're collaborative in approach, and they're founded in lived experience. Thanks. We asked the question, what makes peer work different? And the answers revolved around 4 core themes. The first, peer workers use unique tools. They use themselves, they use their history. They have an ability to act as role models, as witnesses, if you like, to survival and recovery. Whether you're on the carer or consumer side of that, there is a definite survival and recovery to be witnessed. They create a safe environment. We heard from the panel earlier about that validation, how important that was, to have somebody who recognised and heard what was happening for you, and that's where peer workers can create that very special place where it's possible to share and say, this is what is happening for me. It's a collaborative approach. It's very much based on listening to and learning from each other, no matter who you are in the team. Yes, very collective approach. And it starts with a different focus. It thinks differently about the situation. Rather than starting from a you have an illness, you have a deficit perspective, it starts from a person and a person's life and what are we hoping for in life and where do we go. I want you to think for a moment about some of the challenges, and we've heard some of those this morning through the panel. The challenge of engaging somebody in treatment when they're not really quite motivated to get there yet. The challenge of keeping them engaged just after you've told them this is going to be 40 sessions this year. Or maybe 60 sessions. The Minister did reference 60 sessions. Think about people who you've seen actually make progress in treatment. Oh, the relief of it all. This person's making progress in treatment. And then the treatment comes to an end and they're overwhelmed by the setbacks as they try and move back into whatever their routine existence might be. And we seem to have gone back to the beginning again. Think about the revolving door of hospital admissions. That works for some people. Those are the areas of the system of care that peer work has the potential to contribute to. And these are the reasons for building a system of care that includes peer work. If it offers a potential solution, may I say it's not a simple solution? I've heard along the way that this is cheap and this is easy and we don't really have to worry about that. We'll just send them off with a peer worker. And I can't, from my position, agree with any of that. It requires a commitment to recovery-oriented practice, together with very strong support strategies for the peer workers themselves. They are taking a courageous stand, drawing on some of the worst periods of their own life to help other people, and that is actually quite a different way of working to some of the other jobs that we do. The challenges were identified are the same as those in the general mental health literature. They revolve around themes like respect, support, and appropriate expectations of what can and cannot be achieved in particular situations. And a key is developing a clear understanding of the role. But that does not mean a prescriptive list of you can do this but you can't do that. It's a clear understanding of the role and how the role works, a clear understanding of the person who is the peer worker and what they bring to the situation. And it won't be the same for all peer workers. We don't want to prescribe roles so closely that we actually inhibit one of the very things that makes peer work, which is that very flexible and personal nature of what's happening. Challenges mentioned by service providers include, how do you find these trained peer workers? Where are they? Yes. And once I've found them, how do I pay them? The last bit of the question we didn't attempt to answer in the guide, but I'm rather hoping it's going to come up in your discussion over the next couple of days because it's an important one. You can't have a professional workforce out there without thinking about some ways to pay them. And you may be encouraged to know, if you're thinking about this, that it was the top difficulty identified by services. We would love to engage peer workers, but... So there is a challenge for building our system of care. When you actually look at the guide, it's intended to help people who are in areas of workforce planning, but it's also intended to help people who are working as part of treatment teams, clinicians who want to know how to work with peer workers. And it's intended for anybody who is a peer worker, or is thinking about peer work, wants to know if they should have a peer worker. It provides that sort of general information for a broad audience. It's much longer than we ever intended it to be. So we broke it up into shorter bites. And it's a resource to be dipped into. I'd love to think that one or two of you might actually read all of it, but it really is something to be looked at of what did I need today? I'm going to that bit. And that's the bit I'm going to look at. It breaks down into a discussion of that evidence so that you can see that this is an NEDC resource genuinely grounded in some evidence. It has an overview of the scope of practice of peer work as we've defined it and the principles that underpin that practice. And then it has 4 sections which specifically address employer concerns that are very useful if you're actually a peer worker. I haven't run out of time already. So it looks at things like, how do you start a peer workforce? How do you recruit? What are we doing with this job description? How do you provide a safe work environment? How do you train, supervise and support? It starts from a skills-based approach, from a belief that having an experience of an eating disorder actually isn't sufficient in itself. The skill is in the ability to apply that lived experience for the benefit of others. It also considers the need to appropriately support peer workers, provide introductory information on recruitment strategies, HR practices, how to supervise. And the final module looks at some training resources, and I'd like to say here that those training resources are not recommendations. We're not saying this is what you have to do. We're actually saying those programs that we got to interview and investigate, this is the training they used. So this is a starting point for you to think about. Yeah. The biggest single barrier is that peer work is poorly understood. And the second barrier is, how do you integrate that into the team? Because that's where peer work works best. And our suggestion, start as you mean to go along. If you're starting out developing a peer workforce, then start it with people with lived experience. And they will guide you along the way in how to develop it. Yeah. Sorry, back one. If you start to read the guide, you could get the feeling that this is only for people working in large hospitals, because it does dwell a lot on HR and those sorts of strategies and how do I employ somebody. But if this is going to be a core component of the system of care, then it ought to apply to everybody. Yes? Sure, think about engaging a peer worker in your team if you're of a sufficient size to do that. But the other option, of course, that really needs to be explored more as you think about building a system of care is partnering with an external agency. And EDV, given that Belinda was sharing this platform with me, is the perfect example of that. A consumer or carer organisation which is actually already providing peer workers, and look at making that partnership work, because you can overcome a lot of the obstacles by doing it that way. Next one. And this is the last one. Further research is required. I just have to say that. A commitment to the NEDC principle of development that is both evidence-informed and evidence-generating is what we need for the future. We can't wait and not try peer work. We have to try peer work, but we need to put the evaluation strategies alongside that, using some common measures so that we can actually start to compare apples and oranges and say, how are we doing in this area? And that brings us back to the possible outcomes of peer work, which is where I started. This is why you would think about doing this. Before I finish, I would just like to acknowledge the many people and organisations that contributed to this. In particular, Dr. Catherine Gill, who was a co-author of the reports, but also all of those organisations. And the reason it's organisations and not individuals is that there were a number of individuals from each organisation and it got too many to put on the slide. But these are the people who have tried it. Mostly successfully, some with some major hiccups along the way, but from them we learn and carry it forward. Now, I don't know whether we've got time for questions. Have we run out? No, we've run out. So I just leave you with a thought. Peer workers should be a core component offered to all people with a lived experience, their families and carers. What can we do with that while we think about building a system of care?